Welcome to our next episode of Key Connections for Educators. Nate and I are so excited to have our friend and colleague Meghan Rose on today's podcast episode to talk with us about making learning accessible to the many diverse learners we have in our classrooms, both in person and virtually.
We discuss universal design for learners and how we as educators can apply these principles in what we do as trainers or teachers and adapt our instructions to meet the needs of our students. So with that, we are really excited to have you on the channel, Meghan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Meghan, we are thrilled to have you as our very first guest. So thank you for being here. We'd love to know a little bit about your origin story as an educator and how you became interested in learning, and in particular, what sparked your curiosity in universal design for learning.
Yes, I would love to talk about this. So, I actually began my journey as a librarian. I worked in the community college setting for about a decade prior to making the transition into corporate training, which is where I am today. And I was initially attracted to librarianship because I love to read and I love to learn new things and interact with the world of knowledge. I was surprised to learn, though, upon becoming a librarian, how much of that work centers around teaching. I was teaching students how to research and how to be information literate and news literate. And it sparked so much energy from me. And I feel like I found my happy place as a result of that. Not only because it allowed me to continue to learn, which is something that I love to do, but I got to partner with other people as they learn and grow and make discoveries. So it's incredibly energizing and I absolutely love it. And I decided that I wanted to focus more on doing that. So that's why I decided to make the transition into training, learning, and development within the corporate realm, and I'm having a lot of fun.
I love that. I love that. What sparked your curiosity in universal design for learning and that aspect of it?
Yes, yeah, so there are a couple of experiences that come to mind for me that sparked my interest in universal design, which is also known as UDL. First of all, my work in the community college library setting. Our student population was incredibly diverse. This included people with disabilities, those who are neurodiverse, and also students from various cultural, socioeconomic, and educational backgrounds, just to name a few. And I saw it firsthand in the classroom how these characteristics impacted how students would engage with the learning material. And in cases where material was presented in a one size fits all manner, how that would create barriers for students being able to interact and grow and develop through that experience. Another experience that I had was a few years ago, got very ill. And one of my eardrums ended up rupturing as a
Oh
result
no.
of an ear infection. And what happened was my hearing was significantly diminished in that year, and I also had very loud tinnitus for a number of weeks, and that impacted how I was able to interact with auditory media. So listening to podcasts, watching videos, even listening to music became very difficult, and I experienced firsthand the frustration of not being able to engage with material when there wasn't closed captioning or a transcript available. And it generated a lot of empathy. So, both of those experiences were instrumental in my quest as an educator to explore how to create inclusive learning environments for students and remove barriers for their participation. And that's what introduced me to resources like the ADA guidelines and the web accessibility standards and what we're going to be talking about today, the universal design for learning?
Oh, that Megan, that story really resonates with me on a number of levels. I guess first of all, I have over the course of my career had a chance to work with a lot of different people. And so what worked with one class might have fallen flat with another. And now I'm starting to think, well, maybe it wasn't just because of, yeah, something I did. It may have just been that there's different people that respond to things differently. And so I'm really excited to talk about it from that standpoint. And also, just personally, there's actually in my family a wide range of some recently diagnosed neurodiversity. And so, I'm thinking about what school looks like for the kids and, what do I do at work to stay engaged? And so, um, I think this is a very personal topic for me. And so I'm really glad to learn a little bit more about this from you today. Maybe we could start just by defining what is universal design for learning, UDL, and why is that so important?
Absolutely. So you mentioned how this is a very personal topic for you, and I would say that that's the case for so many people. The first reason is that, according to the Centers for Disease Control, about a quarter of American adults have reported some type of disability. And keep in mind that this number is dependent on reporting. So there are people that either are not aware that they have a disability or they're not reporting it. So that's a quarter of American adults. And having a disability will impact how you're able to engage with an experience. Outside of that, neurodiversity, that is a lot more common than we give it credit for. And again, we think of all of the ways that make us individuals, whether that be our race, ethnicity, our gender, our age, all of those things play a role in the world and
Yeah.
how we see it and how we participate in it. So I think this is a very personal topic for everyone if we really think about it. To better understand universal design for learning, it's helpful to take a step back and to talk about what universal design is, because universal design as a concept has been around for a bit longer than UDL. So basically what universal design is it's an approach that aims to make products, environments, and services accessible and usable to the widest possible audience without the need for adaptation or specialized design. And all of us are interacting with an aspect of universal design in our daily lives. So when we think about things like curb cuts, for example, in the sidewalk, that is a result of universal design. So if somebody is in a wheelchair, or if they're riding a bike or pushing a stroller or a cart of heavy objects, or even if they're just walking, it will minimize their tendency to trip. It will make that experience more fluid, and it's something that ends up benefiting everyone. We also think of automatic doors, even closed captioning on TV, and how that makes a difference for people who may have a hearing impairment, or it may also benefit a new parent who has a small child sleeping and needs to keep the room quiet, or who's in an environment where they can't listen to something auditory, but they're able to read through that experience and interact with it that way. So, those are a few examples of universal design. And what universal design for learning does is it takes those concepts and that approach and applies it to the realm of learning.
What this is making me think of is putting our user experience hats on. In thinking about what we're designing and putting forth, really thinking about the learner's experience through this. When you mentioned the sidewalk, thinking about making that sidewalk accessible to a wide range of people just by making those adaptations. And that's a really good lens to be thinking through when we're thinking as educators.
Yeah. I love that you also mentioned that the universal design is not just for one subset of folks, but it's really thinking broadly on how we can make this experience better for everyone.
Yes.
And that really resonates with me because just, you could think that curb cut is really just for somebody with a wheelchair, but I have young children that I'm pushing in a stroller. It is
Yeah.
really convenient. And just somebody walking up and down the street, not having to trip over the curb. It's also really convenient. At the playground, I've seen swings that would accommodate a number of different people, and my kids can use them, and other kids can use them, no matter what situation they're in.
Yes, and those are some really great examples of not only smart design, but mindful and inclusive design. And it excites me so much to think about this within the learning context because it really, in the end, doesn't require a ton of extra work, and you're not having to create duplicative but like semi-altered experiences for people. Everyone gets presented with the same experience, but it's designed in such a way that it gives everyone agency. And it's so empowering.
What you're saying here is that when you just create really good design that's thinking broadly, all of us can come there, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, well, you have special accommodations. You're going to get to do this instead, and you have to be over in the corner by yourself doing this while everyone else engages in something else. It's that no, all of us can have this experience together. I love that.
It's making me think of the energy around this experience and the stigma. And really, as educators, thinking through that lens of how can I best engage my learners? How can I best reduce distractions? And what needs to be scaffolded to make the learning more accessible? Those kinds of questions make it more readily available to many people.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into talking about the application
Yes.
of UDL, so how it can be applied.
Let's do that. If you wouldn't mind, talk us through how we can apply these principles.
Yes, yeah, so to support the implementation of universal design for learning, there is an educational organization that does a lot of research, decades of research. It's a organization called CAST. They developed the UDL guidelines. And essentially, these guidelines serve as a tool to design learning experiences that can cater to the needs of all learners. They provide concrete suggestions for applying the UDL framework in practice and ensure that every learner can access and engage in meaningful and challenging learning opportunities. So, if you visit their website, you can access the UDL guidelines in the form of a graphic organizer. And they are structured around three principles: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression.
We'll put a link to that website and those guidelines in the show notes for everyone. So if you're watching and you want to check out Cast's website and learn a little bit more, please go to those show notes and check out a link.
Awesome.
So, this is making me think of all the ways we as elementary school teachers adapt lesson plans in the teacher's manual or from the district suggested lessons that need changing based on what we as experts know that our students need, what's best for them. So let's go ahead and explore how these principles are applied. So, Megan, talk us through that, how we can apply these principles as educators, as instructional
Mhm.
designers, as teachers.
Yes, I'm so glad that you shared your experience about adapting lesson plans and curriculum based on the needs of your students because universal design for learning, even if we don't know about it yet, is something that a lot of us as educators have found ourselves naturally doing, which is really amazing. So I think that makes people receptive to this message. But what I love is that being able to discover the framework helps you to take it to the next level and feel more empowered as an educator. So, As with any approach to a lesson plan or designing some sort of learning experience, you are going to begin with a little bit of reflection. So you're going to be asking yourself, what are my goals? What do I want students to be able to do after they complete this lesson or this experience? And you're also going to be asking yourself what some of the potential barriers might be for your learners within the context that you're working in. So if you're in a classroom and you're delivering instruction in person, you're going to be asking what the barriers could be in that environment. If you're designing a e-learning or computer-based scenario, you're going to be asking what some of the barriers might be for that particular environment. Once you've made these considerations, this is where that graphic organizer from CAST is going to come in handy. And you're essentially going to be looking at these three principles, and that the first principle, which is almost like the first pillar, is multiple means of engagement. And what this principle asks you to do is to stimulate interest and motivation for learning by providing various ways to engage students, such as offering them choices in how they learn, fostering collaboration within your classroom, and making learning relevant to their lives. Now, you could go so many directions with this. You could incorporate interactive elements like quizzes, discussion boards, or peer reviews to keep students engaged and encourage active participation. You can also provide regular feedback to students so that they understand how they're progressing by providing constructive feedback on their assignments and activities. This will help them stay motivated and keep them on track.
Hannah and I, a couple episodes ago, we started talking about Kirkpatrick and about learning objectives and about what we want to accomplish as a result of this training. And I feel like this fits really well in that process. Now we're just taking it that one step forward and trying to anticipate what might get in the way of those learning objectives being met within the learning. So, what we're saying is in that classroom experience, whether it's in person or virtual or e learning, what is the barrier that would prevent me from learning it?
Yes.
I was in a webinar a few weeks ago, and at the start of the webinar, the facilitator said, "How engaged do you want to be in this webinar on a scale of 1 to 7? Put it in the chat." And then the follow up question was, "Okay, based on your answer, what is one distraction that you're going to actively try to eliminate right now to help you achieve the answer you shared in the chat?" And so then he mentioned turning off notifications, putting your cell phone in another room, like various things to help. But I thought, whoa, that is so practical, actionable, something we could immediately do. And it sounds like it's an application to what we're talking about right here.
Yes. Yes, definitely. It's a tool of empowerment, not only for students, but for you as an educator.
What about representation?
Mm.
Because I know that was the second pillar in these three. So when you say representation, what do you mean by that, and how do we apply that?
Yes. So the next principle within the guidelines is that you, as a trainer or an educator, should provide multiple means of representation. And this principle is all about presenting information and content in different ways. It includes using various media and formats to cater to different learning preferences and ensuring that all learners can access and understand the material. So, some learners may benefit from visual aids, while others may prefer something more auditory or a hands on learning experience. And we recognize for learners that can change from day to day depending on what they have going on in their lives, what they're facing. So, some specific examples of this would be to provide content in various formats, such as text, audio, or video, or even interactive simulations. This will help cater to different learning preferences and, in some situations, give learners a choice in how they would like to engage with that content.
I had an e-learning that I took a couple of weeks ago,
Mm.
and it gave me an option at the beginning. Would you like to watch the video or would you like to read a transcript?
Mhm.
and I could just make that choice. And I think later on, it actually had the choice to flip it back on if I wanted to change my mind.
Yes.
I love video, but when I'm actually learning something, I find that it's easier for me to read because I read much quicker than I watch. And I felt like that put a lot of control in my hands.
Yes, yes, it does provide more autonomy. It allows learners to navigate based on their preference. And I will say too, it's not always just about presenting a choice to learners. Sometimes you're giving it to them in those multiple formats, and that helps them digest the content. So maybe they watch a video that has a transcript or closed captions available, but there's also maybe like a bulleted recap of some of the main points. And I know for people like myself, that is very helpful because I am a slower processor and I like to process content in multiple ways. So having those options available where it's almost scaffolded in a way is very helpful.
I've heard it said, doesn't it take 7 times of us seeing or hearing something for us to remember it?
Yes, definitely. So, the final principle, the third principle, is to provide multiple means of action and expression. And this principle emphasizes providing learners with different ways to demonstrate what they know. So, this can include offering various methods for students to express their skills, such as through writing or speaking or using technology. So you can do this by providing flexible assessment options. Students could express what they've learned through a quiz or a written assignment, a video presentation, or even by navigating through an interactive scenario where they have to make choices to apply what they've learned. Another option here is to make learning self paced and allow students to control the pace of how they're learning. So, a ready example of this would be in an e learning course where students are able to click a button and control when they want to move forward and when they may want to spend a little bit longer reviewing and interacting with what is on that page.
I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of a classroom facilitator. When I was in that space, one of the things that was challenging was just time. So I imagine that's probably one of the things that we're challenged with is trying to create that flexibility, but still having guidelines within that so that we're able to abide by the time constraints of the class that we're trying to run because
Yes.
don't have all day to learn everything. And so what I'm hearing is that there's guidelines with flexibility in them. And I feel like that balance is really what's needed. Something in place that gives us a guideline, but also giving us the support we need to adapt it when we need to. I'm sure that there's a bunch of common misconceptions when it comes to doing that and universal design learning in general. What have you seen or heard when it comes to people just misinterpreting this or missing the mark on what this even means?
Yeah. Well, I would say first and foremost, the name Universal Design for Learning may be misleading. UDL is not really universal in the sense that you're providing a single one size fits all learning solution. It's actually quite the contrary because the UDL framework encourages us as instructors to employ a variety of approaches within our classrooms. And even beyond the classroom. For example, if we're designing computer-based training, it's really about giving us a focus on removing educational barriers that may impede students' progress. So when we're employing it properly, UDL should be, as you mentioned, Nate, approached flexibly and allow us to be nimble as we're offering training, even being able to adjust our approach on the fly if need be. So we're not looking at it like a set of bulleted or like a checklist that we need to make sure that we're checking everything off, but we're looking at it as a structure that we can employ, that we can adapt based on the needs of our learners and also based on the environment that we're working with.
I really do appreciate you shedding light on the flexibility here. So often, educators don't feel like we have the freedom to mix and match based on our expertise. And UDL feels more like a tool rather than a prescribed method. Like, this is what you need to do, almost like a lens or a pair of glasses that we're seeing through rather than must do this, must do this, must do this. So, I would love to hear from your experience as an educator how UDL made a significant difference for you and how you've been employing it yourself as an instructional designer.
Well, I love to answer this question. And honestly, it's really hard to choose only a couple of stories because I have seen it make such a big difference within my own practice and in the lives of students as they've encountered different experiences. So, one example that comes to mind for me occurred in the classroom when I was working as a librarian at a community college. I was leading a workshop, and that workshop involved an interactive group activity where students were exploring a case study and collectively responding to a series of prompts and reflection questions. And in this classroom, there was one student who was clearly struggling with group work and was really reluctant to engage. And I have to say that at first I felt really frustrated with this student, but then I took a pause and I reflected and I was remembering what I had just before this class been considering as I went through the UDL framework. And I decided to view it as an opportunity to adapt on the fly and give the student an opportunity to engage with the material in a different way. I felt empowered to do that in that moment because my goal was that this student was learning and had a growth opportunity. They didn't have to do it in the way that everyone else was. So, what I decided to do was let the student be given the activity and reflect on their own and respond to the prompts and then turn this assignment into me. So, they did go through the same activity as everyone else, just in a slightly different way. They were very insightful. They were very focused as they were going through this activity, and it ended up being a success for them. And in that moment, I realized that UDL is not only something that I can use to prepare for a class or for the delivery of training, but it's something that I can use in the moment to pivot as needed based on what I'm seeing a specific student or a specific group of students may need. I'm not in the classroom as much anymore, but I'm really happy to report that UDL can be applied within the context of developing computer based training within an e learning content as well. So, my second example involves an e learning course that I developed for financial services professionals. And I designed the course to include multiple means of representation, such as videos with captions and concise yet descriptive text, and also interactive scenarios. So there's a lot of variety in how learners can interact with the material. I also designed this course in a way that allowed learners to freely navigate the course based on what they need to know and also based on what they already know. So they are empowered to make decisions with their learning based on what suits them best. The feedback that I got after learners took this course was overwhelmingly positive, and a lot of people ended up reporting that they loved how the course wasn't locked down and how they had the freedom to read or experience content that they needed and that they were able to bypass the material that they already felt that they had mastered. It didn't take a lot of extra time for me to develop this course. It only required a couple of tweaks to my approach to building it, and it made a world of difference.
I am very passionate about not locking classes down. So you are preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, I feel like we just talked about it in a past episode as well, just briefly about how much it honors the student in many ways, honors their time, honors their capacity, what they already come to the table knowing.
When flexibility permits, skip to the end, test out of it for crying out loud, right? You can
Yeah.
clep out of college classes. You should be able to clep out of product training too if you really don't need it. So I absolutely love that. Big advocate. The other thing, when you mentioned captions, and I'm thinking about all the different people that that could potentially impact. So someone that does have trouble hearing, it's going to help them actually get the content they need. But for somebody that's in a noisy office environment, they can turn the volume down and actually read on the screen without distracting their colleagues. And for somebody who just needs that extra visual prompt because they are distracted, it also is helping them. So it really is accommodating so many different people just by having something like closed captionings on.
It is easy to implement, especially nowadays where there are so many tools often built in to platforms that we use to develop videos that will create captions for you and that are very easy to go through and edit to make more readable to the end user. So I find, this is my personal opinion, there is no excuse not to have captions available. To me, it is a deal breaker. And I see no reason not to include captions because it's a tool that's available in so many of the platforms that we're using to create videos. So it's very easy to have them auto generated and go in and edit them just for clarity for the end user. So non-negotiable there as far as I'm concerned. And then based on the corporate training environment and how a lot of us are working with overseas partners, adding closed captioning and textual information can be so helpful for someone who is not a native English speaker or who is still learning English and allowing them to participate in that learning scenario as well.
Great point. Yes, that more global mindset.
Just as we close out the episode today, I would love to get your advice to educators and trainers who are new to this. Like, what do we start? How do we just enter into this world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Anytime you're starting something new, it can feel very overwhelming and like you're facing a big mountain climb. My suggestion for making this approachable would be, first of all, to familiarize yourself with the core principles of UDL. Go out there, poke around, read, and start looking for those little nuggets of connection. And that sort of segues into my next bit of advice, which is to start small. Begin by integrating some of these principles into a single lesson or unit or maybe a single e learning module that you may be working on, and experiment with what works best for the environment that you're working in, what works best for your learners. I also advocate for reflecting and collaborating. So, as you're introducing yourself to these principles, connect with your colleagues and talk to them about it. Maybe look for somebody on LinkedIn who's talking about it and ask them questions, find out how they're applying it to their practice. It's such a great way for us to develop as professionals anyway, regardless of what topic we're talking about, but I have grown immensely by discussing this topic with other professionals. And finally, be patient and persistent. Again, this is not meant to be a silver bullet. It's not meant to be a very rigid set of rules. It's a gradual process introducing this into your practice. So be patient with yourself, be patient with your learners, and just be persistent in creating that inclusive, effective learning environment. If that is your goal, you're not going to have a problem experimenting and figuring out how this works.
Starting small is so key to making something actionable, and really understanding those core principles is such a great way to start. So, thank you for highlighting that because so much of this is mindset. It's a lens that we see through, it's the perspective or the point of view that then helps us as educators perceive better what our students need, and scaffold our instruction accordingly. And I really like that you also highlighted the fact that we can collaborate. That's one reason Nate and I have started this podcast, is to connect educators together so that we can collaborate and we can reflect in these conversations what went well, what didn't go well, what ideas I could take from your lessons and how you've designed instructions, and what ideas maybe I should take a risk and branch out and try something new that might meet my diverse learners even better. So thank you for that. And what resources or tools would you recommend for those looking to learn more about UDL?
The UDL guidelines that are provided by CAST, looking at that graphic organizer, they also have some wonderful videos out there and considerations for the application of the framework. Another amazing resource that I actually consult with a lot when it comes to designing content for e-learning or anything that I'm going to be posting in a document or putting online anywhere is the Web Accessibility Guidelines, which are provided by the World Wide Web Consortium. This is where you're going to find guidelines for color contrast and text size, including closed captioning and alternative text for images, just to name a few things. These things I would say are a good idea to have a checklist for, just because they have such an incredible impact on creating an inclusive environment and can really make or break an experience that somebody has within a learning course, particularly if you're presenting visual or auditory information to them.
Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
I know what I'm taking away is that really this is about empathy. Thinking about other people and designing with inclusion in mind. That means we're not just teaching or educating, but we're really creating an opportunity for everybody to thrive. And I love that.
I do too. We hope this episode inspires you to explore how universal design for learning, UDL, can transform your teaching or training. And if you have an example of how you've created more accessibility for your learners, leave a comment below and let us know about those ideas and suggestions so that we can be learning from you. We can't wait to hear what you've done and learn more about this topic together.